Thanks for being here. If you like, you can subscribe to my channel to get updates on new stories. I've got a story for you about my wife and an open relationship she was keeping from me. Today, we've got a story with a similar plot. Enjoy the show. When this happened, she didn't say, "Honey, we need to talk." I guess I should have seen it coming, but like most people who are happy with their lives, I ignored the signs until they hit me. Was I too trusting? Maybe. My wife, Marcy, is 47 and I'm 48. Our house has been empty for a while now since our youngest son, Kyle, 18, went to college upstate. Our daughter, Rhonda, 20, is in the name Avi, which is a source of frustration for me. I'm a retired Army colonel trying to adjust to civilian life, which is a bit of a challenge for someone who's spent almost 30 years in the Army. We're the Westons. We were at a party in the Goldsteins' backyard. Marcy tried to endure Chuck Marston talking in her ear. Chucky was probably trying to impress her with his muscles rather than his conversation. Marcy rolled her eyes and scratched her nose, giving me the "save me" signal. Meanwhile, I'm having a lively chat with Jenny, a single, hot mom whose husband left her with 2 kids and 40 extra pounds. Well, Jenny's lost some weight at the gym and is chatting with me about fitness or something. I smile at my wife, scratch my nose, and smile. She tells me to stop talking to the big blonde and come save me if I ever want to get laid again. I take Jenny's hand and lead her to my wife, Chuck. Jenny lets me, but she's confused about why I brought her to my wife, Chuck. I say, shaking her hand, "Do you know Jenny Hek?" She seemed a bit confused but got herself together and reached out to Jenny. I seize this chance to save my wife. "My hero," she says, giving me a look that's not quite cheerful. I saved her from this scoundrel, but it took me long enough. You know, Jenny's boobs aren't real, right? Considering how much I paid for yours, I think I know, I answer. Let's head back home. Home, she says. I need to get to the airport early for my flight. As we're heading out of the gate, we pass a young nail-on couple. Vincent Nail-on nods to make way for me while his wife, Leslie, smiles politely. We talked with them before, so we just walk out. For some reason, Vinny and his wife's glances in my direction felt a bit weird. It was like she was starving and looking at her next meal. It was a bit odd, to say the least. My years in intelligence have made me a bit jumpy, so I'm always on the lookout. I'm trying to stop seeing conspirators in every random glance, but I followed Marcy in hopes of a night before the trip. We're no strangers to being apart, especially since I spent years flying in wars and training missions. A year in Korea almost killed our marriage, and during one of our 2 meetings, we had a fight in Hawaii and almost got divorced. Years of military life take a toll on any marriage, and separations, stress, and distractions are just some of the challenges. You get the idea. When I got back, Marcy lost her temper, and we had a hard time getting back on track. But I had a feeling something was up this year, or with someone. It's not uncommon in military marriages. In fact, we have some of the highest rates of divorce and infidelity. After many years of service, I realize how lucky Marcy and I are to still be together, even knowing that she probably cheated while I was gone. How do I know? Because Marcy and the kids moved back to our hometown while I was gone. She got a job at a local hospital there. It was near the hotel where my ex-girlfriend from high school worked as a manager, and she saw Marcy in the parking lot of the Red Roof Hotel across from the hospital. Lydia let me know when I was in Korea, but she didn't have any proof. So I hired a PI to tail my wife. When I got the report, I felt pretty dumb. Turns out, Marcy Hospital was being renovated, and their parking lot was a mess. Only half the space was available. So Marcy had to park in the red roof lot, as did half the nurses and orderlies. There was just one problem. Marcy always showed up for a shift a couple of hours early. It stopped when I got back home. If Marcy was dating someone, there was no way to find out. Lydia could be wrong or right, but it was enough for me to realize that I was neglecting my wife and Marcy could leave for another man while I was not around. There's nothing worse than wondering and not being sure. After I've been to Korea, I'll never have to go there again. A year is a long time, long enough to lose your family. I'll never get back a year of lost connection with my kids and their lives. And on top of all that, the last months of our separation have made me realize that our marriage just isn't as strong as I thought. I'll never know who this guy could be. We had small children at the time, and I wanted to save the family. Plus, Marcy seemed determined to solve our problems rather than leave, and I felt the same. When the chance came up to switch to Army intelligence, I jumped on it. This meant fewer dangerous assignments and, even better, more time at home. So, I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 3 times when war broke out there. In my new role as an Army spy, though, I was pretty much safe behind the lines. This made Marcy happy, but I was worried about how things were going at home. I heard about a lot of marriages in the military that didn't work out, and I decided it was time to leave. It was tough, but I realized that Marcy and I had almost lost each other and broken our family twice. The chances of our marriage surviving if I stayed for the general stars, which might not happen, were slim. After I retired, my consulting job made me more money than if I had stayed and become a general. But then, it was my daughter's senior year of high school, and I saw her and my son graduate, and I still had my wife. It's invaluable. Marcy kept going to nursing school, and now she's the head nurse on the surgical team at the hospital. They specialized in life and death. There were a few neurosurgeons at the hospital, but 3 of them really stood out. An older doctor who was retiring, a woman in her 40s, and a 40-year-old new talent who had joined them that year, Dr. Trey Cardoza. I met him a few times at parties. Tall, dark, and handsome, Dr. Trey was the typical narcissistic specialist surgeon. They do get a bit of a god complex after rummaging through enough brains and saving a few lives. I could tell he had a thing for Marcy, who was always working out. She had the body of a 30-year-old woman, even though she was 47, and Dr. Trey was definitely paying attention to that. I caught him staring at Marcy when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I can only imagine how he acted towards her at work when I wasn't around. And, to my dismay, she was singing his praises, saying he was an exceptional surgeon and the next head of the hospital surgical team. I was already starting to worry. The only time I brought it up, she was silent for a while before saying anything. I get where you're coming from, Rick, but it's my job. I have to work with these doctors, and honestly, they're pretty aggressive towards all of us nurses. It's a pretty stressful environment, and it's nice to have a little flirting to lighten things up. Usually, after a very stressful moment, flirting is a way to take the edge off for all of us. But then things get serious again, and no one does anything. Marcy, what about the gap? When you go to his office or have lunch, how does my wife openly flirt with another man? Remember how you and that CIA woman were inseparable before you were sent to Iraq? Yes, but we don't, I try to say. How do I know what you did and didn't do? She asked, mockingly, making air quotes. I know she was in love with you before you left. I saw it in her face, Rick. If I told her I didn't mind, she would kneel in front of you. Marcy, there was nothing wrong with Deidre. That's what you're telling me, Rick. I should have trusted you with Deidre, so now you gotta trust me. We've been dealing with this issue for months, and it's been hanging over our heads like a dark cloud. If they did something, they did it at work. I've been in enough hospitals to know that there were plenty of empty rooms and offices for people to use and have privacy. And that Red Roof Hotel with its 2-hour early arrival was always on my mind. But her words made sense. I either trusted her or I didn't. The thing is, Marcy also had a reason to be suspicious. Deidre could have offered herself to me in Iraq, and one day after we survived a roadside ambush, she cornered me in an unoccupied office. After not having any for 3 months, I gave in to her advances. She and I were thinking about going all the way when the sirens went off and the base came under mortar and rocket fire. We took this as an order to be careful and never contacted them again. At first, I felt guilty, but then I remembered what Marcy did when I was in Korea, and I told myself that if she can do it, I can do it too. It's meaningless intimacy, that's all. As soon as I get back, everything's going to be the same, and Marcy and I will be even. I was deceiving myself, and here we are, 2 cheaters married to each other, discussing trust. But, honestly, given how attentive and loving Marcy was, I decided I shouldn't be paranoid about our past. I was almost positive she was cheating, but then again, maybe I was just being paranoid. I knew I had my own issues. And now, their whole team is heading to South America on a Doctors Without Borders tour. They do brain surgeries for poor people in 5 countries, and it takes almost 6 weeks. Marcy knew I wasn't crazy about Dr. Trey, but she wasn't going to give up this trip for the sake of her career, and I wasn't going to make waves. I mean, it supported my military career. I stayed home a lot for you, she said. There were times when I had no idea if you were alive or dead, Rick. I mean, what if you got killed or captured like those guys and gals in Desert Storm? I'd have to raise 2 kids on my own. I've done my part. Now it's your turn to wait for me. Things got a little tense this morning when she left for the airport. She spent a lot of time the night before packing her things and talking on the phone with her mother. I found it annoying when it invaded our intimate time that seemed less and less in recent months. I didn't want to start an argument, so I went to bed. When I woke up the next day, she was gone. There was no message, no goodbye kiss, and nothing more. I looked around the house for a note, but I didn't find anything. I checked my phone for messages, but there weren't any. I was pretty annoyed and concerned about the way she left. I was furious. After making a pot of coffee and taking a moment to collect myself, I scanned her flight itinerary. She was going to Colombia, their first stop. They'll land in a few hours, and hopefully, she'll text or call from there. I thought to myself, well, I guess that's another chapter in her marriage. But she didn't call or text, nothing like that. I even double-checked to see if her flight had landed in Bogota, and then I started thinking about whether I should reach out to her. In the end, I sent her a short message saying, "Hope you are fine." I didn't hear back from her, not the next day, not the day after. Running has always been a good way for me to clear my head when I'm stressed, and this time was no different. It took all my self-control to keep an even pace, but my frustration and anger at my wife's silence made me run faster than usual. By the time I finished the last block, I was out of breath and gasping for air. "Rick, are you okay?" a familiar male voice asked. I looked up and saw Vincent Nayland in the yard. Their house was right behind ours, with our backyards separated by a small fence and gate that we never locked. Right behind him was his young wife, working on a flower bed. Nice fifth place, I thought, as Vinny turned to look. Nice view, huh? He asked with a meaningful smile. I looked away from his wife's fifth place and simply nodded. It was a weird situation, but my mind was too busy to process it all. Vince, I'm tired after a run, and I need a shower, I said. I'll catch you later, okay? Of course, he replied. Leslie and I would love to invite you over. We can whip up some steaks, grab a six-pack of beer or some wine if you'd like. Okay, I said. I'll be sure to let you know. You're welcome, Rick said, the young man with a strange knowing smile. I said, and went to my door. After a shower and a cold drink, I looked around our empty house. The TV was on while I waited for a call from my wife. It was already dark outside, and still no call, no text, no email from Marcy. I had called her at the hotel a few times. After checking the time, I realized it was about 10 p.m. They sent me to a room, but there was no answer. The manager apologized, saying, "Sorry, senor," with a hint of an accent in English. It looked like there was no answer. Who am I talking to? Pablo Espinoza, the hotel manager, said. Pablo Espinoza, hotel manager, at your service, sir. What's your name? Rick Weston. Pablo, Mrs. Weston is my wife. I haven't been able to contact her since she left. Can you confirm that she checked into your hotel? Have you seen her? Yes, senor. Sonora Weston has arrived with the rest of the medical team. I saw her earlier with them in the dining room. They came back from the hospital after their surgery. They all looked tired. They ate and went upstairs. Hey, Pablo, can you do me a solid? Sure, sir. He wasn't as polite as before, but he gave it a shot. What's up? The room number for Dr. Trey Cardosa? 514, sir. Do you want me to give him a call? I flinched when I saw that Marcy's number was 515 on the list. Not now, Pablo. I managed to keep my cool. One more thing. Help me out, Pablo, and give Mrs. Penny Washington's room a ring. Penny Washington and Marcy were close. We even went to dinner with her and her husband, Josh, last August. After a bit of hesitation, Pablo replied, "Sí, senor. Please wait." And music started playing on the phone. "Hi, Rick," Penny replied. She knew it was me. I had a feeling that Pablo told her who was calling. Or did she expect this from me? It looks like that was the case. "Hey, Penny," I said. "Sorry to bother you so late." "Don't worry about it," she said. "Why are you calling me? Is Josh okay?" I ignored the question and took a chance. "Here's the deal. Where's my wife?" She took a few seconds to answer. She replied, sounding irritated, "Why are you asking me this?" But I could tell from her tone that she knew. "Don't play games with me, Penny," I said. "My wife's room is next to Trace, and she's not there. I think you know why." "Rick, you need to talk to your wife," she replied. But I swear I heard a man's voice ask, "Who is it?" "Maybe I should talk to your husband about the man in your room, Penny. You know I have Josh's number. I wonder what he would think if you had a man in your room away from home." She didn't say anything, but she did cover the phone, and when she spoke again, it was just her. "Okay, Rick, please don't do this. Please, don't call my husband. This is the first time. I don't care how many times you cheated on your husband, Penny. But if you don't tell me about my wife, I'll call your husband and let him know in a few seconds. Now, go ahead and post it. Where's my wife?" These phones in the hotel can be used to call other rooms. Penny didn't want to transfer me, but she was very cooperative with the threat to her marriage. At least I knew she didn't have time to warn my wife. The phone rang in room 514. Penny, why are you calling us? I heard Trey ask, thinking he was talking to Penny. We? Who the hell were we? But then I got it. We were my wife and Trey. Penny had her way with some guy. It got me thinking about how many folks on the surgical team might have been using this trip as a chance to hook up outside of their marriages. I don't want to ruin your evening, I said in a cold voice, but this is Rick Weston, and I want to talk to my wife. It took him a few seconds to come to his senses. He then went into stupid mode. It seems like it's something everyone does, especially the ones who think they're so smart. It's all about arrogance. Why are you asking me? He asked in a smug tone. Trey, if you care about the surgeon's hands or your eyes, call Marcy. You know you're threatening my wife? You're asking for it. In the end, I lost my temper. There was some noise like a struggle for the phone. Then I heard my wife's voice. Give me the phone, Trey. I heard her voice. I would say good evening, Rick, but we both know that's not true. At this point, what are you doing in his room? I asked, trying not to lose my cool. Why didn't you call or answer my messages? And again, Marcy, what are you doing in his room? Are you having an affair with him? She didn't say anything for a second or two, then turned to Trey. Can you leave for a few minutes? She told him before he grumbled something obscene. Thanks, Trey. After that, for several long seconds, neither of us said a word. I tried to collect myself. She spoke first. Rick, I didn't think we'd have this conversation, or that it would be tonight. But I think we should do it. I didn't say anything, which is something I learned from investigators. Criminals, once caught, tend to confess or build up their defense. I was a good wife, a good mother to our kids, and everything I was supposed to be for us. I've been doing all this for years. Okay, I'll be back home in 6 weeks, and we can talk about where we're going next. But please, just this once, this time away from you, give it to me. Just this once. If you don't mind. If I don't mind? I repeated, almost in shock. Nerves, I'm planning to call you in a couple of days after you and Trey have intimate time. I snapped back. How convenient. After you and Nayland get together, Marcy answered. Have you already talked to them? They invited me over for dinner. What's the occasion? This is more than dinner, Rick. Marcy said Leslie wants you. She wants you to rock her world. I talked to her about it, and it's okay if you do. I'm not perfect either. Yeah, Marcy, I get it. After 24 years of marriage, this is how you check out? You could have at least had the decency to tell me, honey, we need to talk in person. Rick, all that could happen is to start an argument before I leave. You think so? I answered sarcastically. But then I could ask you to stay and not leave. I could stay, Rick, she said, her voice breaking, but I wanted it. I need this at least once in my life before I get old. I need this at least once to feel alive. Just one time to feel like a professional woman on your own. Look, when you were in the army all those years, you were alone, and people judged you by your profession. I want the same. And as for Trey, that's the icing on the cake, Rick. I'm not in love with him, seriously. He's just a toy, and I did leave Leslie for you, right? Other wives leave behind casseroles. Did you leave me a woman? She chuckled nervously. What? What can I say? I take care of my husband. What the? Marcy? Rick, she just turned 30. 30? Rick, You're 48. I'm giving you a 6-week call pass with our 30-year-old roommate, Rick. How many women like Leslie are beating down our door? So, you got me a woman while you deal with Dr. Trey. Thanks for thinking of me, Marcy. Sorry if I don't thank you. We'll be together again in 6 weeks. I won't ask you what happened, and you won't ask me. You understand? I understand everything, I answered. I love you, Rick. I heard her voice. I loved you too, Marcy, but now I'm not so sure. I hung up, not wanting to prolong our pointless and painful conversation. The phone rang. I went to open the door to see Leslie. Good evening, Rick, she said with a dazzling smile. I noticed that she was alone, without her husband. Hey, Leslie, I said, a bit nervous. I looked at her because she looked amazing. Leslie's makeup was subtle, just enough to accentuate her face, and her blonde hair was medium to short. She had on pink lipstick and matching eyeshadow. She was wearing a floral print sundress that showed off her hourglass figure. I noticed that heels make a woman's legs look longer and her calf muscles look more defined. It was a youthful and healthy look that attracted me more than the outfits that some women think turn men on. Are you going to let me in? She grinned, raising an eyebrow. Of course, I said, stepping aside so she could go into the kitchen. I stared at her body for so long that I didn't notice she had a bottle of wine with her. She handed it to me and smiled. It was a red Moscato. How did she know I liked it? Then it hit me. It was Marcy, my wife, who had told her to bring it. I was hoping you wanted someone to talk to. I'm not sure how good of a companion I'll be, Leslie, but I've got something to ask you. Where's Vincent? I asked, holding back the Vinny part, since that's how everyone around here called him. He went out with his friends to play cards. I thought about how her husband had left his young wife alone. How many times was Marcy alone? How many times have I left her to her own devices, giving in to temptation? So Marcy went to South America, she said as I poured her a glass. Have you heard anything about her? Funny you should ask. I was just talking to Marcy when you knocked. Oh, sorry, Rick. Did I interrupt? No worries, we covered everything. She probably sensed my terrible mood. Rick, I think we need to talk. Let's sit down, I said, pointing to the living room. What did she tell you? That should have been my question. Why don't you start? I was hoping Marcy would talk to you before she left. Really? No. I had to play telephone games with her, only to find out that my wife is hiding out with her doctor boyfriend in South America. Then she told me to talk to you. So let's stop playing games and tell me what you and her planned before she left. Leslie nodded, then took a long sip from her glass. We met her a while back at a shopping center. We hit it off, and we had a drink in our backyard one day. I have no idea where you and Vincent were, but you know us girls and booze. Soon, I started chatting about my marriage and my husband's weird quirks. She paused like she was trying to decide what to say next, but I just looked back without saying anything. And of course, she kept talking, Rick, my husband loves to share with me. Shall I share with you? I asked, a little confused, before I realized what she meant. Oh, do you mean with other men? She finished my sentence. Exactly. Interesting. I managed to blur it out. And as far as I understand, you told Marcy about this? I was a little tipsy, and Rick, I'll be honest with you. Certainly. I find you attractive. Don't get me wrong, but I'm into older guys. I'm flattered that I fit that type, but why tell my wife about this? I wanted her to know. And let me tell you, how'd my wife deal with all this? I was surprised that she just listened and didn't say anything, Leslie continued. At first, nothing. Of course, she was a little shocked at first. I think she asked me to explain how this was happening between me and Vince. I explained, and she seemed to be thinking about something because her gaze clouded over. I told her, well, Marcy never discussed this with me. So Marcy never talked to you about this? You know about you and me? She actually dropped a bomb on me over the phone right when you arrived tonight. She seemed surprised by the phone. I took a sip of my drink and nodded. Rick, you said you found out about her and her doctor friend this evening. I wouldn't call a man a gentleman who sleeps with another man's wife. I agree, she said. My husband and I share everything, but I never do anything behind his back. So Vincent knows you're here? Of course, my husband knew I liked you ever since you moved into our neighborhood. I haven't had a regular lover in a while, and I was looking for him. Do you have regular boyfriends on the side? I only had one of those before. This one's been around for 2 years. But we mostly go out of town and meet men. Vincent finds them online, and we meet them for dinner or drinks. If I like them, we go to our room. So, while you're with this guy, what does Vincent do? Well, Vincent finds guys online who'll let him into the room. He likes to watch, but it's also safer, I think. So I replied, shaking my head. How long have you two been doing this? About 4 years, she answered casually, as if we were discussing gardening. So what about Marcy? Oh yeah, Marcy, she said with a smile. She crossed her legs and leaned over. A couple weeks ago, she came by and said she was on board. But I'd have to do it with you when she left the country with her surgical group. Did she mention what she'll be doing while she's away? No, but we're women. I had a feeling she was maybe feeling a bit guilty about something. What exactly? Well, she probably knew what she would do there. Allowing me to have access to you might have eased her conscience. Leslie shook her head. Honestly, I wish she had talked to you beforehand. I'm not a fan of this sneaking around. I didn't say anything to that. Even Leslie thought so. I have something for you, Leslie said, handing me the letter Marcy left for me to give to you. She reached into her purse, pulled out the letter, and handed it to me. Come on, read it. I'll go to the ladies' room. She made a gesture and facial expression as if asking which way. I pointed to the right. Thanks. I'll be back soon, Leslie said, smiling and emptying her glass. The envelope was pretty plain. It had just one word on it, RKU. I took a deep breath, opened it, and started reading. Dear Rick, I'm a coward, and by the time you read this, you'll know that I'm breaking my vows with Trey. But before you judge me, think about you and Deary in Iraq. I don't have any proof, but I'm pretty sure you and her had intim in Iraq. You're a terrible liar, Rick, but then I'm no better. The first time Trey touched me, I didn't tell you. Maybe I should have done that, and perhaps I should have had an affair or affairs during all those years I was home alone and lonely while you were away at war. I've already suffered enough. Our kids needed 2 parents, Rick. I tried to be both mom and dad, but I'm not you. Only you are you. And I needed my husband's touch. Damn it. But I put up with all that pining, and I stayed faithful to you. It wasn't easy, you know. Then you went to Iraq, and your dear Deidre Klein returned home before you. She came to see me and said she took care of you over there, then left before I could ask what she meant. But when you came back, I knew exactly what she meant. Any doubts I had were cleared away when you turned away in shame. Rick, I know 2 wrongs don't make a right, Rick. I also know that there's a possibility that you didn't do anything to her. If that's the case, I'm the one who's been unfaithful here with Trey. But I don't think that's the case. I think you were the first to do it, and maybe you've done this before or not. It may or may not have been the first time. But I'm tired of being an obedient wife waiting at home and chasing after my war hero. When Leslie told me she was in love with you, I talked to both her and Vincent about it. He admitted that he allows her to have other men, and they have an open marriage. So, it looks like I won't have to worry about breaking up their marriage, only that I cheated on you. So that's the situation we're in. I'm going on this trip, and during my absence, I'm not your wife, and you're not my husband. I'm giving myself a 6-week gym pass, and you're getting one too. As far as I understand, if we're still in love, we'll forget about it when I see you when I get back. If we don't do this, I'll be hurt and I'll be sad about what we had and what we lost. Just so you know, Trey didn't seduce me or force me into it. I'm doing this because I want to, not because I have to. I'm not a fan of him, but I do find him attractive. When I get back, it'll just be a memory. If I'm with you, what am I supposed to do with him after you're done with me? Well, it won't matter then, will it? Rick Weston, I'm telling you, you are and always will be the love of my life, even after you broke my heart. I love you. It was an honor to be your wife and mother to your kids, but after all these years, I need a break from us. Leslie's totally cool with spending a night with you until I get back. Vincent would pay you to let him watch, but it's your call. I know she won't leave Vincent for you, since he lets her get with a lot of guys like that. I doubt she wants to give it up. Here's something to think about, Rick. If you love someone, set them free, and may they return to you. I'll be back in 6 weeks. I'll always love you, Marcy. P.S. Leslie should have been tested for STDs before she came to see you for the first time. Just make sure she shows it. Trey and I were both screened before we left. I'll get tested for you before I go back, and I won't touch him or anyone else until we meet. Then I'll show you my STD test. Please do this a week before I get back, and also abstain. This will be our first step in building trust. I booked a room for us at the Ambassador Hotel near the airport. If you want to meet me, be there 2 hours after my flight is due to return. I'll head there solo after I get there. Please don't come to the airport when my flight lands. And, don't make a scene, either. Take me back or leave. I'll be waiting for you at the hotel. I'll be waiting in the lobby. After reading, I noticed Leslie pouring herself another glass. Are you all right? She asked. I'll be fine, I replied. She nodded and took a bottle and a filled glass, sitting down next to me. She refilled my glass and looked at me with her deep eyes. So, Rick, what do we do? I looked at her and said, thanks for delivering the letter to Marcy. I hate what she wrote, but I really appreciate you giving me that letter. As for what we do nothing. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested. I'm not gonna lie, I'm attracted to you, but I'm not looking for a relationship. I spent a lot of time in the army and overseas, but I was faithful to my wife, with one very unfortunate mistake. I'm not going to let Marcy get away with what she's done and continues to do. With that, I stood up, took my glass of wine, and walked into the kitchen, pouring the wine into the sink. Leslie just looked at me, not saying a word. Honestly, I don't think she expected that answer. I think she was so used to having men at her beck and call, especially when she was proposing intim, that she was stunned and confused by my answer. When she didn't say anything, I took the wine bottle, put the cork back in, and handed it to her. Leslie, thanks again for delivering the letter to Marcy and for your offer. She finally got what I was saying and what my actions meant. She stood up and walked toward me, trying to be seductive, but I had no interest in continuing the conversation. She started to say something, but I cut her off before she could say a word. I'm really bummed about Marcy's actions. I'm asking you to leave so I can understand what this means to me. I let her out the door and handed her the last bottle of wine she bought. Once outside the door, she turned and started talking again, but I slowly closed the door. I wasn't trying to be rude, but I just had no time for her. I've been in the military for almost 30 years, especially in intelligence, so I've got a lot of contacts and resources. I also realized the mistakes I made with Marcy. For starters, I should have had a heart-to-heart with her about her actions while I was in Korea. She said she was faithful to me, but I never talked to her about showing up to her shift 2 hours early. I had to clear things up. I had no idea how much this would affect me. Second, I had to be honest about my failure in Iraq. I guess I was too ashamed of what I did, and I just couldn't be honest with her about it. I should have confessed to her as soon as I got back. And now I find out that Deidre already told Marcy, giving her a reason to start an affair with Trey. Marcy asked me straight up about it 4 months ago, and I just kept lying, like she said in her letter. Marcy was sure that I had lied to her about it. Third, I had a feeling something was going on between her and Trey, but I didn't push it. This was mostly because she asked me about Dear Deidre and the shame I felt about what I'd done. She was able to shut me up by taking advantage of my inability to be honest with her. I took her letter and reread it. At first, I thought it was self-serving and full of her excuses for cheating. Reading it again didn't change my perception, but it did make me realize that the woman I loved, the woman I raised our children with, and the woman I thought I would grow old with, was gone. She was replaced by someone I didn't like, and someone I was no longer in love with. I loved her for my kids, so I didn't want her to get hurt, but deep down, I knew it was over. I'm never gonna forgive her, and I'll never trust her again. I also realized that the woman who wrote this letter was delusional. After 24 years, didn't she know me? How could she think that I could accept her actions? But what really got to me was her self-esteem. She really thought she deserved what she did. Her statement was total BS. How could she say that I'm the love of her life and then write, "But I'm tired of being an obedient wife, waiting at home and chasing after my war hero"? She's totally contradicts herself. While her whole letter pissed me off, one part really got me, playing soldier. What the hell? Marcy knew who I was and what I did when we got married. It was no secret. It was a hard life, but we got through it together. Does she think I enjoyed being away from my family? Did she think I liked being in the field and training, or actually being in combat? And what about when I turned down the opportunity to become a general because I knew how much pressure it would put on our marriage? How could she have thought that continuing this charade would be something we could survive? To hell with it all. And on top of that, she apparently avoided spending a night with me before the trip to say goodbye. I think she wanted to be fresh for Dr. Trey. She just kind of up and left for the airport, and then she just disappeared. I mean, she didn't say a word until I had to ask her about it, and then I realized that maybe she didn't love me as much as she said. She was so wrapped up in her own desires and this break from us that she didn't give a damn about me or my feelings. She didn't respect me at all. I thought we had something special, but now it's clear she wants to take a break from us. She'll be on vacation for the rest of her life. It's time to take action and move forward without her. I've got a ton of contacts, so it's time to put them to good use. The next morning, I went for a run, had a good workout, had a good breakfast, and then called my office, saying I was taking a few days off. I had seen a lot of marriages fail in the military, so I had a pretty good idea of what to expect and how to end this failing marriage. My next step was to reach out to an old Army buddy, Jackson Steele, who had served in the Jaguar Corps but had retired to start his own practice. I told him what had happened, what was going on, and what I wanted. He put me in touch with a woman he called the best divorce lawyer he knew. I called her office and made an appointment for the next day. I let her secretary know why I was there, and she emailed me a list of documents I needed to bring. I went online, paid off our joint credit cards, and then canceled them. Marcy had a card in her name, so I knew I wouldn't inconvenience her. Then I went to the bank and withdrew half the money from our savings and checking accounts, removing my name from them. I also took all the documents and items out of our safe. Then I went to another bank and opened accounts in my name only. I also got my own safe. After I left my new bank, I went to the HR department at my employer's office. I was a consultant, but my company had a lot of connections with the government. There, I changed the beneficiaries of my life insurance policy and 401k to my kids. I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me before the divorce was final, Marcy still wouldn't win. Then, I called Jackson back. I told him to change my will to leave everything to the kids. I also appointed him as the executor of my estate. I was surprised that I was able to get everything done in one day. But instead of taking it easy, I went home and started packing. I was surprised at how many things no longer had any value to me. I think this was because a lot of the memories tied to those things were tainted by Marcy's actions. I left them for her, and if she doesn't need them, she can get rid of them. The next day, I met with Lisa Davis, the lawyer Jackson had recommended. She was a nice woman, and I was happy to have her as my lawyer. I had a feeling she could be ruthless if necessary. I gave her all the documents I was supposed to bring, and I also gave her a copy of Marcy's letter. She went through everything, checked them out, put together a worksheet, and asked me about what I wanted to do with our shared property. I told her I wanted to sell the house and split the equity. If Marcy wanted, she could buy my share. I also wanted her joint investment account to be separate. Basically, I tried to be as fair as I could. I was pretty upset about what Marcy did, but I didn't hate her. Lisa also asked if I wanted to take any action against the hospital or Trey. I told her I wasn't interested in taking legal action against anyone. Over the next few weeks, I rented an apartment and packed up everything I wanted to take from the house. In the end, there wasn't much. I didn't take any furniture, dishes, or anything like that, just my clothes and some mementos from my Army career. Lisa hired a company to document everything in the house and estimate its value. I wanted a fair settlement, you know? I also talked to my boss about taking more out-of-town and overseas assignments. With my daughter in the Navy and my son in college, there was nothing keeping me here anymore. For weeks before Marcy's return, I was getting everything ready for her to sign the divorce papers. Everything I wanted was packed, put in the garage, and ready to move into my new apartment. I furnished it with furniture, provided it with food, and all the necessary utensils, and I took with me most of my clothes. I doubt my neighbors had any idea what was going on. I kept doing all my usual activities to keep everything looking normal. I didn't need to tell anyone about my plans until I decided it was time. I actually saw Vince and Leslie a few times. I was polite but made it a rule to talk to them very briefly. At one point, Vince came up to talk to me, but I pulled away, telling him that I was already leaving and didn't have time to talk. Later that evening, Leslie called, but I let it go to voicemail and deleted it without listening. Nothing they had to say was important. Then the next week, I got a call out of the blue. I realized it was Marcy because it was an overseas number. We both had international plans on our cell phones, so I was surprised that she didn't call or text me on it. She left me a short message asking me to call her. She said cell coverage was bad, but she needed to talk to me. She didn't say what she needed or what the call was about, only that she needed to talk to me. I didn't call her back because I didn't have anything to say to her, and I wasn't sure what she wanted to talk about. 3 days later, I got another call from her. This time, she said she was really worried about me and needed to talk. I wasn't sure what was up, but I let it go and didn't call back. She wanted a break, so I gave it to her. Later that evening, Vince and Leslie came by. I didn't bother opening the door. The next day, I waited until most of the neighbors were at work and asked a small moving company to come to the house to pick up the boxes I had put in the garage. It took me and 2 guys about 20 minutes to move everything from the garage to their truck. The rest of my toiletries and clothes were in my car. I moved out of the house. I was out of town for work for the next week. I think my neighbors noticed I was gone. Leslie called me, but I just told her I was out of town. I let her know I didn't have time to talk, so we didn't discuss anything else. I kept in touch with my kids, parents, and relatives the whole time. They checked on me, knowing Marcy was out of the country, just to make sure I was okay. I made sure everyone knew I was doing well. I got another call from Marcy, but I just ignored it. I didn't even bother listening to the voicemail she left. I realized that what I've written makes it seem like I was handling this in a very clinical manner, but I'm truly devastated by Marcy's actions. To be honest, her attitude really got to me. After our phone call, when I learned about her affair and read the letter and thought about her behavior, I felt shocked and angry. But then I felt really sad. I realized that she had changed a lot. She was pretty cavalier about it all, acting like she didn't owe me anything or anyone. While working in intelligence, I worked closely with special operators. I gave them the info they needed to do their job. I had contacts and made friends with some very serious and intimidating men. These guys were all about getting the job done, no matter what. In short, they were as deadly as any human being on Earth. Because of the nature of my work, I kept in touch with a few special operators every now and then, including a couple from a certain team. My unnamed friend gave me a number to call if I ever needed his help. A week before Marcy was supposed to come back, I called her on my cell. I dialed the number and hung up without leaving a message. A few minutes later, they called me back. I spoke briefly with this person and hung up. Later that day, I met this guy at a small biker bar about 50 meters from my hometown. I gave him Marcy's name, photo, and address. I told him what I wanted to do. I told him it's a hospital, not a morgue. The day Marcy returned, I sent an email to my whole family and a few friends. In it, I confessed to my only failure in Iraq and took responsibility for my failures. I also included a copy of Marcy's letter. I wasn't planning on stirring up trouble, but I did want to let everyone know that I filed for divorce and why. Before I sent the letter to everyone, I sent it to my kids first. Then I gave them a call and explained everything that was going on. I didn't want to blindside them, but I felt they deserved to know the whole story. They were both really upset about the divorce and Marcy's actions. Rhonda was especially angry with her mother. "I can't believe Mom turned into such a person," my daughter screamed into the phone. Then she quickly added, "What the hell is she thinking? She was a role model for me, but now she's showing her worst side." I started to answer her, but then I realized she was just getting tired. so I let it go. Instead, I told them both, I love you, and I understand how this affects both of you, but we will get through this. I'm honestly at a loss as to what your mom is thinking, but there's nothing more I can say or do. I don't trust her anymore, and I won't accept what she did. She's shown that she's incredibly selfish and doesn't care what others think or feel. Because of her attitude and actions, I'm leaving her to live the life she chose. Kyle, what do you think? I think Mom's gone crazy. I can't think of any other reason why she would do this. We didn't have anything else to say, so we said goodbye and hung up. After that, I called my parents and relatives. Both sets of parents were shocked, especially Marcy's parents. I just pointed to Marcy's letter as evidence of her attitude and actions. Of course, both sets of parents wondered if I could go through with it and get through counseling. I told them there was no way I was doing that. I felt bad for Marcy's parents. They were good people, and it was clear they were deeply hurt by her actions. I made those calls from the airport, and shortly after that last call, I boarded a plane and left for an overseas assignment. I had to leave the country for the next 2 months. Marcy won't see me at the hotel tomorrow or any other day, as she had hoped. The next day, the surgical team went back to the airport. I don't think they expected the reception they received. Josh was there to meet Penny and immediately started attacking her, demanding to know who she slept with. Damn it, I called him and spilled everything. He had a right to know who he was married to. A few other members of the club, both husbands and wives, had experienced similar treatment. Josh made it a point to call and tell everyone what he knew and did everything he could to find out who Penny was sleeping with. Judging by the live feed I got, it was a pretty messed up show. Dr. Trey did his best to avoid all of this, but it seems his girlfriend didn't like Marcy sleeping with him during their trip. She hit them both and had to be physically restrained from doing anything else. There were also some hospital staff and Doctors Without Borders representatives there to see what happened during the trip. Josh, as you might guess, did everything he could to damage the reputation of the hospital and their organization. His threats of lawsuits have definitely gotten people's attention. It took about 10 minutes for everything to calm down. The police showed up, and they separated a lot of the greeters from the returning team. The hospital administrators took the team aside and told them to be at the hospital in the morning for a full briefing. They were told that their future work would depend on the result. Around this time, a guy dressed as a limo driver approached Marcy and asked, "Are you Marcy Weston?" She looked confused and said yes. He handed her a big manila envelope and said, "You have been served." Colonel Weston also had a message for her. She was free to go. After saying all that, the man left, leaving Marcy shocked and surprised. I switched off the live stream I was watching and moved on with my life. But this isn't the end of the story. Later that evening, Dr. Trey came home tired and pretty upset about what had happened at the airport. He wasn't too happy about his affair with a member of the surgical team being made public. His evening was about to get a lot worse. Turns out, he was the victim of a home invasion robbery. The last thing he remembered was being shocked when he crossed the threshold of his house. A few days later, he woke up in the hospital with a broken nose. His left orbital bone was broken, he lost several teeth, and the fingers on his left hand were broken with his index finger and thumb crushed. His right elbow and right hand were also broken, and all the fingers and thumb on his right hand were crushed. His house was trashed, and a message was spray-painted on a blank wall. It said, "Don't mess with married women." Would you agree to this type of relationship, and would you have the same reaction as your husband? Let us know in the comments. See you in the next video.